a recent article that I saw someone quoting on a podcast as evidence that this is a natural spillover, and that there is new discussion that points to COVID-19 being a natural spillover. And I saw that widely dismissed by many people that were furious, saying that ignored the science that points to the fact that this was engineered. What is your perspective on this?
Well, I've believed from the very beginning that, almost the very beginning, actually, 1 hour into my awareness, I changed my mind. I tweeted at first. So as you know, I'm a bat biologist. I studied bats in grad school. And when Heather and I were in the Amazon writing the first draft or finishing the first draft of our book, we emerged to the news that this, what was then called novel coronavirus, was circulating. And so it just sort of dawned on us, what is this? And we were trying to figure it out. And I looked at the initial materials. I looked at the explanation of how it likely had come through bats. I was familiar with the family of bats in question, and I just decided to tweet to my followers that, more or less the story added up as far as I could tell. And I did that, and I immediately got back a response somewhat annoyed by a longtime follower of mine who said, so it's just a coincidence that there's a biosafety level 4 lab in the exact place that this virus emerged? And I said, what the hell? I don't know anything about this. I don't know what a biosafety level 4 lab is. And I started to look into it because, if those labs were everywhere, then maybe it doesn't mean anything that there happened to be one in the very place that the virus seems to have emerged. But they aren't everywhere. And the idea that the bats in question aren't in the place where the virus emerged and the lab was, and that the lab had been searching for exactly this sort of virus in the wild, it all pointed in a particular direction. And so I immediately followed up my tweet and said, don't listen to that. There's more here to be understood. And the deeper I dug, the more convincing I found it that this had actually emerged from the lab, and not as a simple matter of having passed through the lab. That's possible that you could bring a virus into the lab and not do anything to it, and then it could escape.
Just a coincidence.
Right, but that's not what this was. What we're talking about here is a highly unusual pathogen with unusual, in fact, unprecedented genetic alteration given the subfamily that it's in. And all the circumstantial evidence points to this laboratory, the behavior that it is known to have been involved in. So,
But could you explain what is unusual about the pathogen?
Well, many things are unusual about the pathogen. Part of it, it's very unusual for a pathogen to behave in the way that this one behaves, right? This is seeming to hit many different tissues in the body. And so, I will say I have been accused by some of being part of the group that thinks COVID isn't serious and that the vaccines are dangerous. I do think the vaccines are dangerous, but I also think COVID is dangerous. I think the hazard of it is not captured in the case fatality rate, that this thing is obviously having impacts that we don't understand. So that's one set of things. And I would just point out, there's a reason that a normal pathogen doesn't do the wide-scale damage that COVID seems to. And that reason is that in general, pathogens don't have an interest in harming you. They harm you incidentally, right? In fact, they do best when you are healthy enough to walk around and spread them. And so they tend to spare tissues that do not help them to be transmitted. Well, that's not the case with this pathogen. This pathogen seems to invade all kinds of tissues that don't help it to spread. And that is...
How so?
Well, it seems to invade using the ACE2 receptor, and it shows all kinds of pathologies. I mean, from, damaged toes and weird circulation issues. It seems to get into the brain. It's a very strange pathogen. You would expect it to self-limit to tissues that help it spread. And the fact that it doesn't is actually what you would predict if you enhanced a virus in a laboratory environment where it was freed from the constraint of having to keep its host healthy enough to spread it, right? So let's take, I don't know whether this is right or not, but logically at least it serves the purpose of explaining it. If you think about the loss of taste and smell that so many people seem to experience with COVID, well, now imagine a wild animal that had that effect, lost its taste and smell, right? Well, for most mammals, that would be a devastating loss from the point of view of them even just feeding themselves, right? So it would be a hazard if COVID was spreading in wild animals and it was robbing them of this essential tool for finding food, then it would cause its host to start starving. That's not a good thing. On the other hand, if you caged a bunch of animals together and you allowed them to spread the pathogen and you fed them, let's say it's ferrets, which is a likely experimental organism, if you were feeding them ferret chow and they were falling all over each other, infecting other ferrets, then that constraint is lifted. Then the point is it's not bad to lose your sense of taste and smell from the point of view of passing on the pathogen, and that would fit very well for the human population too. Right? You lose your taste and smell. It's annoying, but it doesn't get in the way of you getting fed. And so, anyway, there are many different ways in which this pathogen behaves in a bizarre fashion. The furin cleavage site, which allows it to invade tissues so effectively, that's something that we knew would take a Sarbaco coronavirus and cause it to be highly infective in humans. We knew that before SARS-CoV-2 ever emerged. So to find it on this virus, even though no other member of the subfamily has it, is conspicuous. So I guess what I'm telling you is I rapidly moved in the direction of believing that the most likely explanation was laboratory enhancement and escape. Everything I have seen only moves me farther in that direction, including the repeated efforts to shut down that explanation, right? I mean, every month we go and we don't find the intermediate host is evidence that there is no intermediate host, that the intermediate host is the lab, right? So we are continuing to add evidence upon evidence. And every time that we are, caused to wonder, every time we see headlines that say, no, it turns out it was the wet market, there's nothing there.
So what was